For modern Chief Information Security Officers, compliance is not a side responsibility. It is a core element of executive accountability. At the top of every effective program lies the fiduciary duty to protect the organization, its customers, and its shareholders through adherence to applicable laws and regulations. A CISO's role in compliance extends beyond technical implementation to strategic alignment with business objectives, risk appetite, and ethical standards. Board oversight reinforces this accountability, setting expectations for regular reporting, clear escalation paths, and visible leadership engagement. Compliance ultimately reflects organizational culture. When tone at the top reinforces integrity and transparency, trust becomes the currency of resilience. The regulatory landscape governing information security is complex, fragmented, and continually evolving. Sector-specific regulations, such as those in finance, healthcare, and critical infrastructure, impose tailored obligations that demand domain expertise. Privacy laws like the GDPR in Europe and the CCPA or CPRA in California extend compliance obligations beyond borders, forcing enterprises to manage cross-jurisdictional data flows responsibly. Cybersecurity-specific directives, such as those issued by supervisory authorities or national cybersecurity agencies, add additional layers of scrutiny. The rise of extraterritorial reach and conflicting legal requirements underscores the need for governance structures that harmonize compliance across global operations while maintaining flexibility for regional nuances. A robust compliance program rests on well-defined architecture. Policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines create a hierarchy that translates legal and regulatory requirements into actionable controls. Each document has a distinct purpose. Policies establish principles. Standards define measurable expectations. Procedures describe execution steps. And guidelines offer best practices. Underpinning this framework is a clear matrix of roles and responsibilities, often expressed through ROSI models that identify who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Governance forums and decision charters formalize ownership, while documentation control and version management ensure traceability. The result is a living compliance ecosystem, not a static manual. A risk-based approach to compliance ensures proportionality and focus. Rather than applying uniform control intensity across all areas, risk-based compliance calibrates effort based on inherent and residual risk. Materiality analysis identifies where regulatory exposure is greatest, allowing leadership to focus on what truly matters. Control selection is guided by the principle of proportionality, implementing measures that address risk effectively without overburdening operations. This approach directly ties compliance to enterprise risk management, ERM, linking regulatory duties with strategic decision-making. When compliance activities are prioritized through risk analysis, organizations achieve both efficiency and assurance. Control framework mapping is the connective tissue between regulations, policies, and operational execution. Frameworks such as ISO/IEC 2701 Annex A, NIST SP 853, and the CIS controls provide structured catalogs of security measures. Privacy-focused frameworks like ISO 27701 and the NIST Privacy Framework extend control coverage to data protection. COBIT ensures alignment with IT governance, while SOX introduces financial accountability through IT general controls. A unified control matrix maps all obligations, regulatory, contractual, and policy, to specific control requirements. This traceability enables auditors and executives alike to see precisely how the organization satisfies compliance obligations across multiple regimes. Training and awareness programs transform compliance from paperwork into behavior. Employees at all levels must understand how their actions influence regulatory outcomes. Role-based curricula ensure that each staff member receives training relevant to their responsibilities. Developers learn secure coding practices. Privileged users study access control management. And vendors understand contractual obligations. Phishing simulations, policy attestations, and micro-learning modules reinforce knowledge through repetition. Metrics on completion rates, behavior change, and training effectiveness help measure cultural maturity. When education becomes continuous and engaging, compliance moves from obligation to instinctive practice. Records management and evidence retention form the backbone of defensibility. Every compliance program must maintain a structured approach to retaining, organizing, and presenting evidence. Retention schedules specify how long records must be kept based on legal and operational requirements. Legal hold processes ensure that data relevant to investigations or litigation is preserved. Audit trails, system logs, and configuration baselines provide proof of adherence to controls. Evidence repositories store documentation in consistent, auditable formats with chain-of-custody protocols. These artifacts must be reproducible and verifiable, allowing regulators or auditors to trace actions back to responsible owners with confidence. Monitoring and testing ensure that compliance frameworks remain functional under real-world conditions. Control self-assessments allow business units to verify adherence to standards, while continuous control monitoring tools detect deviations in real time. Key compliance indicators, KCIs, track program health, and thematic reviews or red team exercises reveal weak points. When exceptions occur, remediation actions are tracked to closure, with verification steps ensuring effectiveness. Testing transforms compliance from a static reporting exercise into a dynamic system of assurance. Through ongoing validation, the organization proves that policies and controls work as intended, not just that they exist on paper. Internal and external audits represent the third line of defense within the compliance ecosystem. Internal audit teams maintain independence from daily operations, evaluating program effectiveness through structured audit plans and clearly defined scopes. Entrance and exit meetings foster transparency and encourage dialogue. Findings are categorized by severity, and root cause analysis leads to corrective action plans that address systemic issues, not just surface symptoms. Regulatory examinations and third-party readiness assessments complement these efforts, providing external validation. The audit process closes the assurance loop, verifying that compliance is sustained through continuous governance and accountability. Third-party and supplier compliance is an increasingly critical dimension of oversight. Organizations depend on vendors for cloud services, infrastructure, and critical processes, yet retain regulatory accountability for data entrusted to others. Due diligence questionnaires, on-site assessments, and evidence-based validations test vendor compliance claims. Contractual clauses, including SLAs, data protection agreements, and audit rights, codify expectations. Continuous monitoring of supplier performance and independent attestations, such as SOC 2 or ISO certifications, build confidence in third-party resilience. Concentration risk management ensures that reliance on any single provider does not jeopardize compliance continuity. Vendor oversight transforms outsourcing into a controlled, auditable partnership. Privacy and data protection have become inseparable from compliance itself. Modern regulations demand transparency, accountability, and fairness in how personal data is collected, processed, and shared. Data inventories and records of processing activities provide visibility into information flows. Privacy impact assessments and data protection impact assessments evaluate how initiatives affect individuals' rights. Mechanisms such as consent management, data minimization, and lawful bases for processing ensure compliance with principles of necessity and proportionality. Cross-border data transfers require additional safeguards, including standard contractual clauses or equivalent mechanisms. A mature privacy program protects both individuals and organizations by embedding ethics into data management. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Secure development and DevSecOps practices are now integral to compliance. Regulations and frameworks increasingly demand demonstrable evidence that security is embedded throughout the software development lifecycle. Compliance requires security checkpoints at design, coding, testing, and deployment phases, ensuring vulnerabilities are identified and mitigated before release. Secure coding standards, automatic scanning tools such as SAST and DAST, and open-source governance through Software Bill of Materials (SBOM) are becoming routine audit expectations. Change management processes and segregation of duties ensure that no individual can unilaterally modify production environments. Production access controls and release sign-offs complete the loop, demonstrating disciplined governance and reducing compliance exposure in agile development pipelines. Incident reporting obligations form one of the most time-sensitive aspects of compliance. Many laws, including GDPR, sector-specific regulations, and contractual agreements, specify exact timeframes for notifying regulators, customers, or affected parties. Compliance teams must maintain playbooks that align with these statutory deadlines, defining escalation paths, approval workflows, and notification templates. Breach classification criteria determine which incidents meet disclosure thresholds, while evidence preservation protocols protect integrity during investigation. Post-incident reviews validate whether notifications, communications, and mitigation efforts met compliance expectations. Timely and transparent reporting reflects both accountability and maturity, ensuring that trust is maintained even under pressure. Metrics and board reporting translate compliance data into strategic insight. Dashboards that track key compliance indicators provide executives with a clear snapshot of program health, highlighting overdue actions, recurring audit findings, and remediation velocity. Heat maps and trend lines show progress over time, while regulatory horizon scanning identifies emerging laws or standards that could affect operations. The narrative accompanying these metrics links compliance to business outcomes, reduced fines, faster market entry, or enhanced reputation. When CISOs present compliance performance in measurable, business-aligned terms, they elevate the function from operational oversight to strategic enabler, reinforcing accountability across the leadership team. Compliance programs face recurring pitfalls that erode effectiveness if left unchecked. The most common is the checkbox mentality, where compliance becomes a perfunctory exercise rather than a culture of accountability. Over-customization of frameworks can lead to control sprawl, duplication, and inefficiency, while undocumented exceptions create hidden vulnerabilities. Weak evidence, incomplete audit trails, and tool-only solutions contribute to audit fatigue and misplaced confidence. Misaligned incentives, such as linking compliance metrics solely to avoidance of findings rather than risk reduction, can distort behavior. Effective CISOs confront these anti-patterns early by reinforcing independence, streamlining controls, and aligning incentives with long-term governance outcomes rather than short-term appearances. Continuous improvement ensures that compliance remains dynamic rather than stagnant. Lessons learned from audits, incidents, and regulator feedback must feed directly into program updates. Control rationalization eliminates redundancy, simplifying the environment while maintaining assurance. Benchmarking against industry peers and leveraging maturity models provides perspective on progress and competitive standing. Automation, including continuous control monitoring and policy as code capabilities, reduces manual burden and increases consistency. Periodic program reviews assess whether compliance remains aligned with risk appetite, business strategy, and regulatory change. Continuous improvement turns compliance into an evolving discipline, a cycle of learning, adjustment, and refinement. Maturity in compliance is achieved when accountability is distributed and embedded throughout the organization. In advanced programs, business units, IT, and security teams each own their respective obligations, supported by governance structures that coordinate oversight rather than dictate it. The CISO's role becomes one of orchestration, ensuring coherence across decentralized teams while preserving visibility for the board. Compliance metrics evolve from reactive lagging indicators to proactive leading ones, signaling not only where gaps exist but where emerging risks are forming. At this stage, compliance ceases to be a burden. It becomes an organizational capability that strengthens brand integrity and stakeholder trust. Automation represents the next frontier in compliance management. The complexity of overlapping regulations and control frameworks demands tools capable of aggregating evidence, testing configurations, and flagging exceptions in real time. Continuous control monitoring, CCM tools, can assess policy adherence automatically, alerting teams when thresholds are breached. Policy as code transforms governance documents into machine-readable rules that integrate directly into operational systems, bridging the gap between compliance design and implementation. These technologies free human analysts to focus on interpretation and improvement rather than manual verification, making compliance faster, smarter, and more adaptive to emerging risks. Board engagement remains the ultimate measure of compliance effectiveness. Directors now expect regular, data-driven reporting that connects compliance posture to organizational resilience. They want to understand how regulatory exposure translates into potential financial or reputational impact and how remediation plans are progressing. The CISO must ensure that board discussions are candid, evidence-backed, and framed in business language. By embedding compliance updates into regular risk reporting, leadership reinforces its commitment to transparency and integrity. When boards champion compliance, they signal to investors, employees, and customers that ethical governance is not optional. It is central to enterprise sustainability. Privacy, cybersecurity, and compliance continue to converge, forming a unified discipline of digital governance. The modern CISO must manage these intersections holistically, ensuring that controls for confidentiality, integrity, and availability also support legal obligations for fairness, consent, and transparency. This convergence reflects a broader shift toward accountability-based regulation, where organizations must prove, not just claim, that they operate responsibly. Effective CISOs anticipate this evolution by designing compliance systems that demonstrate evidence of trustworthiness through continuous monitoring and improvement. In this way, compliance becomes the visible manifestation of good governance. In conclusion, compliance is not merely adherence to rules, but a living expression of organizational ethics, governance, and accountability. For CISOs, it represents both a responsibility and an opportunity to align control frameworks with risk, embed transparency into culture, and sustain trust through measurable performance. A mature compliance program integrates risk management, continuous monitoring, and accountability across every line of defense. By maintaining a dynamic, evidence-based approach, organizations achieve more than regulatory compliance. They secure resilience, confidence, and credibility in an increasingly scrutinized digital world.